The sound of rain had always been Emily's favorite kind of silence. It filled the spaces in her apartment that words could never reach, gentle, constant, and forgiving. That afternoon, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold, she wondered how long it had been since she'd really felt something. Not just the rhythm of the days or the noise of routine, but a feeling that reminded her she was still alive inside. Her life looked peaceful from the outside, a small, neatly kept apartment, a stable job as a designer, friends who checked in now and then. But inside, there was a quiet ache she couldn't name. She often told herself she was fine, that she just needed rest, maybe a weekend away. Yet beneath that thought was a deeper truth. She missed connection. Not romance exactly, but that unspoken warmth that comes when someone really sees you. The clock ticked softly, a sound that always reminded her of how much time she let slip between moments. Every day seemed to fold into the next. Meetings, meals, emails, sleep, then repeat. She told herself she should be grateful. She had everything she once thought she wanted. But lately, the mirror reflected a version of herself she didn't fully recognize. Someone strong on the surface, but tired in the eyes. That Friday, she caught herself staring at an old photo on her phone, a picture of a quiet lake from years ago, sunlight spilling through pine trees. It had been taken during her last real vacation, one she'd gone on alone. She remembered how peaceful that silence had been. The thought of returning to that feeling made her chest tighten, part longing, part fear of what she might find if she stopped long enough to listen to her own heart. Without thinking too much, she opened her laptop and searched weekend retreat near the coast. The photos showed wooden cabins, misty mornings, soft music, everything she'd been missing. She clicked book now before she could talk herself out of it. "Just 2 days," she whispered, almost as if asking permission from her own exhaustion. The drive was long, but soothing. The gray sky followed her the entire way, and the sound of tires against wet pavement became its own kind of lullaby. She turned off the radio and let the world quiet down. As the city disappeared behind her, so did the noise in her mind. When she finally reached the retreat, a wave of calm met her like a soft embrace. The place was surrounded by tall pine trees and the distant sound of waves crashing against rocks. Wooden lanterns lined a narrow path that led to a small reception cottage. Everything smelled like rain, salt, and something sweet she couldn't quite name, maybe lavender or cedar. A woman at the desk greeted her with a smile. "Welcome, Emily. You're just in time. Dinner's at 7, and we leave tea by the window for every guest. If you need anything, just ring the bell by your door." Emily nodded politely, though she wasn't planning to need much. All she wanted was silence, not the lonely kind, but the kind that lets you breathe again. Her cabin was simple and warm, cream-colored walls, wooden floors, soft lights. A small record player sat near the window with a stack of old vinyls beside it. She smiled at that. She hadn't listened to music that way in years. She set her bag down, removed her shoes, and stood for a moment just feeling the stillness. It was strange how quiet could feel like company when you let it. As night began to fall, Emily made herself a cup of chamomile tea and stepped outside. The air was cool and a gentle fog hung low across the trees. She could hear faint laughter from another cabin nearby. Not loud, just enough to remind her that other souls were somewhere out there too, maybe also trying to find a piece of peace. She closed her eyes and took a long breath. For the first time in months, her thoughts weren't racing. The stillness around her began to loosen something inside, a small knot she hadn't even realized was there. Maybe this was what she'd been searching for. Not a vacation, not an escape, but a place where she could finally stop pretending she was okay. She walked back inside and found a note resting on the nightstand. It wasn't there before. Folded neatly, with her name written in soft handwriting. Emily. Her heartbeat slowed, uncertain. She looked around the room. The door was still locked, the curtains untouched. With a quiet, nervous breath, she opened the note. It said, "Sometimes rest finds us in ways we don't expect. Don't rush the peace you came here for." There was no signature. For a long moment, she just stood there, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Who could have left it? A staff member? Another guest? Or was it simply part of the retreat's charm, a way of helping guests settle in? But something about the handwriting felt personal, thoughtful, almost familiar in a way she couldn't explain. She placed the note gently on the bedside table, turned off the lamp, and lay back on the bed, listening to the rain again. Her mind should have been calm, but now it was quietly alive, full of questions she couldn't name. Somewhere outside, she thought she heard footsteps, slow, fading into the distance, and though she couldn't see anyone through the window, she suddenly had the strange feeling that she wasn't as alone as she thought. The morning light poured softly through the thin curtains, turning the room golden and still. Emily woke to the scent of pine and ocean air drifting in from the half-open window. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was, until her eyes fell on the folded note still resting on her nightstand. She picked it up again, reread the words, and let out a quiet breath. There was something comforting about them, like a voice from another time. Something in that handwriting had stirred a memory she couldn't quite catch, a shadow of a moment long past. She made herself a cup of tea and stepped outside the cabin. The mist still lingered between the trees, and birds moved through it like soft brushstrokes. The retreat was quiet. Only the gentle creak of wood and the distant sound of the sea filled the air. As she walked down the path toward the garden, her thoughts drifted, not to the present, but to a memory she hadn't visited in years. It had been spring then, much warmer than this morning. She was 24, full of energy and dreams, yet unsure what to do with either. She had just started working at a small design firm downtown where everything felt new. The city, the people, even her own sense of possibility. That's where she met Daniel. He was quiet, often sketching in the corner of the studio during lunch breaks. He had the kind of calm that made others feel at ease, the kind that didn't demand attention, but somehow drew it anyway. Emily used to pass by his desk, glancing at the lines he drew, always wanting to say something, but never quite finding the right words. One afternoon, she finally did. "You draw the city like it's breathing," she said, her voice barely above the hum of the office. He looked up and smiled, not a wide smile, but one that felt real, like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe that's why it never stops moving." That was how it started, not with grand gestures or confessions, but with quiet moments, shared silences, and the kind of comfort that didn't need explaining. They began taking coffee breaks together, walking along the river near the office. Sometimes they talked about art, sometimes about nothing at all. Yet even their silences had meaning. Emily learned he loved autumn, that he painted at night when he couldn't sleep, and that he believed every person carried a small map of their own peace inside them. They just forgot how to read it sometimes. She never told him, but she often thought he was the calm she'd been searching for in herself. But life, as it often does, had other plans. After a year, the company downsized.
Daniel left for another city. A new opportunity, he said, one he couldn't turn down. They promised to stay in touch, and for a while they did. Emails, letters, occasional late-night calls when the distance felt too long. But time moved faster than their words. 1 month turned into 2, then into silence. There was no fight, no ending, just distance, quietly doing what distance does best. And yet, every now and then, she would still think of him. When she passed a quiet cafe, when she saw the river lights at dusk, when she smelled rain on the pavement. It wasn't longing in the dramatic sense. It was gentler, like an old melody she could still hum, but no longer remember all the words to. Now, standing in the garden of the retreat, she felt that same echo rising again. The note, the handwriting, the calmness of this place. It all reminded her of him. The way he used to say that peace isn't something you chase, it's something that waits for you to stop running. She smiled softly to herself, unsure if it was just coincidence or something deeper, the universe's quiet way of sending reminders when you least expect them. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of the ocean through the air. The leaves rustled like soft whispers, and for a fleeting moment, she imagined Daniel standing there beside her, sketchbook in hand, half smiling, watching the waves with the same stillness he always carried. She closed her eyes and let the feeling linger. Maybe the past didn't vanish completely. Maybe it simply found new ways to return, not to haunt, but to heal. Later that afternoon, as Emily wandered through the retreat's small art room, she noticed several sketches pinned to a corkboard. One of them stopped her in her tracks. It was a charcoal drawing of a lake surrounded by pine trees, drawn from an angle she recognized instantly. It was the same lake from her photo, the same one she had visited years ago on her solo trip, the one she had never shown anyone. Her heart began to race, but she couldn't explain why. Beneath the drawing, a small initial was signed, D.M. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the edge of the paper. There were many Daniels in the world, she told herself. It didn't have to be him. Still, her mind refused to let go of the possibility. Maybe it was fate playing softly in the background. Maybe it was nothing. But she couldn't ignore how that one letter, D, made her feel like the past wasn't done speaking yet. As she turned to leave the art room, the door opened quietly behind her. A man's voice, warm, familiar, and calm, said her name. Emily. She froze. Her heart forgot to beat for a moment, and when she turned around, the past she thought she'd left behind was suddenly standing right in front of her.
Emily turned slowly toward the doorway. There, framed by the soft light spilling through the window, stood Daniel. His hair was a little grayer now, his expression a little older, but the calmness in his eyes was exactly the same. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to shrink until there was only the quiet rustle of leaves outside and the soft rhythm of rain beginning again on the roof. He smiled, almost unsure, as though testing whether this moment was real. "I thought it might be you," he said softly. Emily's voice caught before it found shape. "Daniel, how are you here?" He laughed lightly, rubbing the back of his neck the same way he used to when he didn't know what to say. "I could ask you the same thing. I've been coming here every autumn for a few years now. It's sort of my escape from the noise." Emily felt her chest tighten with a strange blend of disbelief and quiet wonder. "I didn't even know this place existed until last week."
Maybe you were meant to find it now, he said, his tone gentle, almost thoughtful. Maybe we both were. They stood there for a long second that felt both awkward and peaceful, like time itself had paused to breathe. They ended up walking outside together, following the narrow path that curved through the retreat's garden. The rain had eased into a mist, and the air smelled like wet earth and pine. "Still drawing?" she asked, glancing at him as they walked. He smiled. "Every day. I even teach a few art classes here during the season. It's not much, but it keeps me grounded." "That drawing in the art room, the one of the lake, was it yours?" He nodded slowly. "It was from a trip I took years ago. Funny thing is, I wasn't alone there. I saw someone sitting by the water, sketching the reflection of the trees. I never spoke to her, but I remember thinking she looked peaceful." Emily stopped walking. "That was me." Daniel turned, eyes widening slightly. "You were there?" She nodded, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. "I went there to clear my mind. I didn't notice anyone else. I guess we've been crossing paths longer than we realized." For a moment, they both just stood there, letting the truth of that sink in. Fate, or maybe just coincidence, had been weaving their threads together for longer than either of them knew. They found a wooden bench near the fountain and sat down, the sound of water filling the quiet between them. "I never meant to disappear," Daniel said after a pause. "Back then, when I left the city, life got complicated and I didn't know how to stay in touch without feeling like I was holding you back." Emily looked down at her hands. "I know. I kept telling myself it wasn't your fault, but I still checked my inbox every morning for a while, just in case you'd written." He let out a breath that sounded almost like regret. "I did write, a few times. I just never sent them." She smiled sadly. "Maybe that's how life works sometimes. We write the right words, but they arrive too late." Daniel nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe they arrive exactly when they're supposed to." Their eyes met again, not with the sharpness of longing, but with the warmth of recognition. It was like seeing an old photograph come to life, edges faded, but heart intact. They spent the afternoon walking through the retreat together, talking about small things, like how city life had changed, what they'd learned since their 20s, the people they'd met and lost along the way. Emily found herself laughing again, softly and freely. It felt easy with him, like slipping into a rhythm she hadn't realized she still remembered. When they reached the cliff overlooking the sea, Daniel stopped. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, gray clouds melting into silver water. "You know," he said, "I used to think peace was something you found once and then held on to forever, but now I think it's more like the tide. It comes and goes, but it always finds its way back." Emily smiled. "Maybe people do too." He looked at her then, and the years between them seemed to dissolve. There was no need for apology or explanation, just quiet understanding. Two hearts that had once drifted apart, now finding comfort in the same silence again. As evening settled, they returned to the main hall where the lanterns glowed softly in the rain. Before parting, Daniel turned to her. "There's a small gathering by the fire tomorrow night. Guests share stories, sometimes even drawings. Would you come?" Emily hesitated, her heart caught between the safety of solitude and the pull of something she couldn't quite name. Then she nodded. "I'd like that." Daniel's smile deepened, calm and genuine. "Good, then it's settled." He walked away down the path, the lantern light fading with his steps. Emily watched until he disappeared into the mist, her heart quiet but full, not of answers, but of something even better, peace that no longer felt borrowed. That night, as she placed the note back on her nightstand, she noticed something new written on the bottom corner in the same familiar handwriting. "Some stories never end. They simply find new pages. She didn't remember that line being there before. And as the wind whispered through the trees, Emily couldn't tell if it was coincidence or Daniel's quiet way of saying what words still couldn't.
Morning came dressed in quiet silver light. The storm that had whispered through the night was gone, leaving behind glistening leaves and air so still that even the ocean seemed to be holding its breath. Emily woke early, her mind replaying fragments of yesterday. Daniel's smile, his calm voice, the note that somehow had new words written on it. She traced the line again. Some stories never end. They simply find new pages. Something about it felt like an invitation, gentle and uncertain. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the mist drift between the trees. The retreat would end tomorrow. By then, she would have to decide whether this reunion was just a kind accident or a sign that the past had quietly circled back for a reason. When she stepped outside, Daniel was already by the fountain, sketchbook open on his lap. He looked up as if he had been waiting, though neither of them had planned to meet. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Too many thoughts. They don't rest easily." He closed his sketchbook. "Maybe they're trying to tell you something." She sat beside him, the fountain's soft rhythm filling their pauses. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "what would have happened if we'd stayed in touch?" He took a long breath before answering. "All the time. For years, I told myself that letting go was the kind thing to do. You were just starting your life, and I didn't want to be another anchor. But the truth is," he hesitated, his voice low, "I missed you more than I let myself admit." Emily looked down at her hands, the same hands that once held her phone waiting for his messages that never came. "I missed you too. But maybe we both needed time apart to become who we were meant to be." Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what this place is about, finding what was lost, not to keep it, but to understand it." The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, scattering light across the garden. Emily watched as it danced over the fountain's surface, turning every drop into a tiny spark. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. He smiled, not with sadness, but with peace. "No, because every choice led me here. And if I hadn't left, maybe I wouldn't have found the quiet I needed, or the courage to see you again without all the things I once left unsaid." They walked together down to the edge of the retreat's cliffs, where the sea stretched endlessly beyond them. Waves rose and fell with patient rhythm, as if echoing their conversation. "Do you still draw cities?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "but these days I draw places that make me feel small. Mountains, oceans, open skies. They remind me to listen." Emily smiled. "You always had a way of hearing things the rest of us missed." "And you," he said, glancing at her, "always saw beauty and details everyone overlooked." Their eyes met, gentle and knowing. There was warmth there, but also an understanding deeper than affection, a quiet recognition that love doesn't always need to be rekindled to be real. Sometimes it just needs to be honored. That evening, the retreat hosted its small gathering by the fire. Guests shared stories, read poems, sang softly into the night. When Daniel's turn came, he stood with his sketchbook and spoke instead of reading. "I used to think art was about capturing what I saw, but now I think it's about remembering what I felt, even if those moments are gone.
Sometimes they return not to repeat themselves, but to remind us we once lived fully. When he sat down, Emily felt tears sting her eyes. It wasn't sadness, but gratitude for every missed moment that had somehow led back here. After the gathering, they walked quietly toward their cabins. The path glowed faintly under lantern light. Halfway there, Daniel stopped. "I don't know what happens after tomorrow, but whatever it is, I want you to know, meeting you again reminded me that peace isn't found in being alone. It's found in understanding the heart that never stopped caring." Emily felt the lump in her throat, the kind that comes when words aren't enough. She reached for his hand, briefly, a soft gesture that spoke more than any confession could. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me again, even if it's just for now." The next morning, the retreat was bathed in sunlight. Bags were packed. Guests said their goodbyes. When Emily came to the reception desk to check out, she found an envelope waiting with her name on it. Inside was a small sketch, the two of them standing by the cliff, the ocean stretching behind them. At the bottom, in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "Peace isn't a destination. It's a person's quiet heart finally listening." She smiled, folding the note carefully. Outside, she saw Daniel loading his car, their eyes meeting one last time. No grand promises, no heavy words, just a look filled with mutual understanding. "Take care, Emily," he said. "You too," I said. "Keep drawing." He nodded, and with a final wave, he drove off down the winding road. I stood for a long while watching the horizon shimmer where sea met sky. A soft wind brushed against my face, carrying the scent of pine and salt, the same air that had greeted me when I first arrived. This time it didn't feel lonely. It felt alive. I turned toward the trees, breathing in the quiet peace I'd finally allowed myself to feel. Maybe the note had been right all along. Some stories never end. They just find new pages. And somewhere, in a sketchbook filled with memory and grace, hers was still being written.